After my sister died of hunger, my father sold my mother like a sheep. I was afraid of death, so I entered the palace and became a laundry maid. My fingers were covered with sores and I couldn't get enough food, but I endured it slowly, thinking that as long as I could stay alive, I was happy. Until that day when there was a hole in the clothes sent by Chu Xiugong. The eunuch in charge did not dare to confront Chu Xiugong, so he could only falsely accuse me of having ruined the clothes and gave me 30 strokes of the cane. I was beaten to pieces and had a high fever and was on the verge of death. Only then did I realize that surviving in the palace was extremely difficult. I stuffed all the money I had saved for a year into the housekeeper's pocket and knelt at her feet. "Grandma, please help me." Grandma looked at my face and smiled brightly. "With eyes like yours, good days are ahead of you." 01. There had been a severe drought in Jingzhou for 3 years, and the family had long been unable to make ends meet. After my sister died of hunger, my father sold my mother to Wang Laosan, a butcher, for 3 taels of silver. He gave my brother 2 taels of silver so that he could escape. Then he took a tael of silver and went out to buy some wine. I asked my father, "Will Mom come back?" My father got impatient and kicked me away. "Don't bother me when I go out to buy some wine, you loser. If you want to see your mother, you can. Tomorrow I will sell you to Wang Laosan." My chest was kicked so hard that I lay on the ground, unable to move. It took me a long time to finally get up, enduring the pain. It was already dark, and I missed my mother, so I secretly went to Wang Laosan's house. My mother was tied up in the pig pen by Wang Laosan. He was naked, with marks of torture all over his body. I went forward crying and wanted to hug her. My mother forced herself to open her eyes, and when she saw me, she pushed me away. "My dear, run away, leave here. Go out and beg, even if you have to sell yourself as a slave. Don't come back." I burst into tears. "Mom, how can I save you?" My mother looked sad and said, "When you grow up, become capable, and have money, then you can save me." I nodded and cried. My mother pointed in a direction and said the capital city. Once there, I could earn money and learn skills. I wanted to save my mother, so I gathered all my strength and ran in that direction. From sunrise to sunset, my feet were bleeding, but I didn't dare to stop. I don't know how long I ran, but I finally entered the city. She sold herself into the palace without knowing it. 02. After entering the palace, I was assigned to Zinzheku and became a laundry maid. Life in Zinzheku was hard, but I had half a steamed bun and a bowl of porridge for every meal, and half a tael of silver as a monthly allowance at the beginning of the month, which made me feel very happy. So even though the well water is freezing in winter and all my fingers are covered with frostbite, I am still full of hope. As long as I can save up 3 taels of silver, I can go and redeem my mother and stop her from being a slave. I told my roommate Suyin about my thoughts, and she laughed. "Fool, the 2-legged sheep was eaten by someone. Your mother is already dead." I was so angry that I told Suyin to shut up. Suyin got angry too, and together with other roommates, she beat and kicked me. "You bitch. You dare to yell at me?" My great-aunt from the same clan is the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. I will be a noble lady in the future. Do you think you can survive by entering the palace and having food to eat? If you offend me, I will make sure you can't survive in Zinzheku. 03. Suyin did what she said, and from then on I became a target of bullying by everyone in Zinzheku. All the dirty and tiring work fell on me, and even the food turned into slop. Several times Suyin pushed me into the river while I was washing clothes. She watched me splashing around in the river, and she and others cheered on the shore. "Your mother is a 2-legged sheep, and you are a drowned dog. What a good mother and daughter pair, ha ha ha. I have caught a cold and been sick, but I have gotten through it all." An older palace maid felt sorry for me and secretly advised me, "Go kowtow to Suyin and apologize. It's common for a servant to die in the palace. Life is worthless. The reason you're still alive is because you're still useful." I don't understand what use I am. Until Suyin ruined the clothes sent by Chushio Palace. The steward, eunuch Su, was furious, which lowly maid with rough hands and feet ruined the noble lady's clothes. All the palace maids looked at me. My heart skipped a beat, and I vaguely understood what my role was. Suayin stepped forward, pointed at me, and said, "Eunuch Su, it was Chiu Chan who ruined it." Eunuch Su looked at me coldly and said, "Take him out and give him 30 lashes." I cried out, knelt down in front of Eunuch Su, and hastily explained, "I am innocent." Suayin washed the clothes, not me. Eunuch Su looked impatient and waved his hand to signal the eunuch to drag me away. The young eunuch took the order and dragged me out. I struggled hard and cried out that I was innocent. The young eunuch was annoyed by my noise and slapped me hard in the face. Do you think Eunuch Su doesn't know? Suayun is eager to show off. She ruined Yugue's clothes, so someone has to take the blame. It's useless for you to struggle. You can't escape this beating. In this palace, we servants have to work with our heads on our shoulders. We might lose our heads someday. 30 strokes of the cane won't kill you. Just accept your fate. If you keep making trouble, you might end up dead. The young eunuch's words made me shiver all over. I remembered what the housekeeper said to us when we first entered the Zinzheku. This palace is full of cannibalism. I didn't understand it before, but now I seem to understand it a little. 04. After being beaten, my skin was torn, and I almost died under the stick. I lay on the bed, gasping for breath, feeling how hard it was to be alive. Suayin was humming a little tune while packing her things in the house. When she saw me half dead, she walked up to me with a smile and said, "Bitch, how does 30 lashes taste? I've long told you that killing you is no different from killing an ant, but you still don't believe me. I tell you, I ruined Lady Yu's clothes on purpose, and I blamed you for ruining her clothes, and then I went to report it to Lady Yu. Now Lady Yu thinks I'm smart and asked me to serve her in her yard. You are just a tool. In this palace, you can only be used by us and serve as our stepping stone. Once I become someone close to the noble, I will definitely find an opportunity to become the emperor's woman. I will be very successful in the future, and you can only wait to die here." I could hear Suayun's triumphant laughter in my ears, and a sense of immense powerlessness rose in my heart. That night, I developed a fever, felt sick all over, and had difficulty breathing.
I knew I might die.
We palace maids are not qualified to see the imperial physician. If we have connections, we might be able to ask an apprentice from the imperial hospital to help us prescribe medicine. If we don't have connections, we can just wait to die if we get sick. I remembered a lot of things in a daze. I thought of how my sister stuffed the last piece of bark into my arms before she died of hunger, hoping to keep me alive. I thought of my mother being dragged out of the house by my father, crying and telling me to run. Boundless darkness surged over me, as if to pull me into hell. I tried desperately to keep my eyes open. I knew I couldn't fall asleep. Once I fell asleep, I would never wake up again. I won't admit defeat. Why should I die? Why should I be bullied? Why can't I climb up? I struggled to get up and took out the wallet from under the pillow. There are 10 taels of silver in it, which I saved during my 1 year in the palace. Holding the silver, I hobbled to the door of the housekeeper and grandma and knocked. Grandma's son opened the door and saw me without any surprise. I knelt down at Grandma's son's feet and stuffed the silver into her hand. "I want to live. I want to become a noble. Please give me some advice." 05. Grandma's son took the money and stuffed a packet of medicine into my pocket. "We'll talk about it after you survive." This packet of medicine tasted very bitter, and I didn't know if it was useful. I took it over and over again for more than 10 days before the fever finally subsided. Grandma's son looked at me, who had escaped death, and said with a smile, "You are a worthless person, but you are quite suitable to be a slave." She reached out her hand and gently brushed my eyebrows. "But your eyebrows are born to be the master's." I didn't quite understand what Grandma's son said, but I didn't dare to ask, so I could only lower my head and listen carefully. At the beginning of the month, the queens of each palace will go to the Ministry of Internal Affairs to select some servants to serve them. You can go and try your luck then. Whether you can be favored by the nobles depends on whether you have the luck. But don't let Su Difu know, otherwise it will easily cause a scare. Su Difu is Eunuch Su. He is the eunuch in charge of Zinseku, and Grandma Sun is the grandma in charge of Zinseku. The two have always been at odds with each other. Moreover, Eunuch Su had cooperated with Sueyun to frame me before. If he knew that I wanted to escape from Zinseku and get out of his control, he would definitely not be willing. I kowtowed to Grandma Sun and said, "I know.
Thank you, Grandma.
I will never forget your kindness." Grandma Sun waved her hands and said, "I don't need you to never forget it. I just want you to remember this favor. When you get to a high position in the future, you can help an old servant like me." Grandma Sun said it very confidently. I don't know how high a position a third-class palace maid like me can reach. I don't know why she is so confident, but I still nodded seriously because this is my only chance. I will definitely remember it. After saying goodbye to Grandma Sun, I waited patiently and did my work carefully, not daring to reveal a single word for fear of being discovered by Eunuch Su. After waiting for a long time, the day finally came. As soon as I came out of Zinseku with my grandma, we were stopped by Eunuch Su at the door. 06. Grandma Sun, where are you going? Eunuch Su stared at me fiercely as he spoke. I lowered my head and shuddered all over. It seemed that the news had leaked out. Grandma Sun smiled and said, "Send Xiao-chan to the Imperial Household Department. Today, all the queens will come to the Imperial Household Department to select servants. I reported Xiao-chan's name a month ago. I will take her there now. It would be bad if I let the queens wait." Eunuch Su's face turned livid, knowing he could no longer hold back. He stared at me intently and spoke after a long while. "Then I hope Xiao-chan can catch the master's eye and rise to higher positions, so she won't die in obscurity in the Zinseku." These words were naked threats, clearly telling me that if I didn't please a certain empress today, I would die in obscurity when I returned to Zinseku. Grandma Sun didn't say anything and just pulled me away. My mind was in a mess along the way, and I kept worrying about what I would do if I lost the election, and that Grandma Sun would never be able to help me again.
07.
When I arrived at the Imperial Household Department, I was placed among the palace maids. Compared with the other palace maids, I seemed out of place. They were all dressed up carefully, and each one was pleasing to the eye. Only I was dark and thin, and the clothes I wore were all shabby. I felt that the possibility of my being selected was too slim, and I didn't know why Grandma Sun was so sure that I could reach a high position. I vaguely felt two pairs of gazes falling on me. I became alert and looked in the direction of the gazes. I saw Sueyun and a little palace maid looking at me from a distance. Sueyun was pointing at me and saying something to the little palace maid, and the little palace maid kept nodding. After I finished explaining everything, the little palace maid trotted over and stood behind me. It was obvious that she was also one of the palace maids to be selected this time. Sueyun walked slowly to my side and sneered, "You lowly slave, you still dream of climbing up? It's ridiculous. Eunuch Su asked me to tell you that he is waiting for you at Zinseku." I looked at Sueyun, and I still couldn't understand why she wanted me to die. I was about to ask her when a voice interrupted me. "The distinguished guest has arrived." Sueyun glared at me and hurried out. Then I saw her coming and supporting a beautiful woman in palace dress. The eunuch Lu, the chief eunuch of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, bowed quickly and said, "Your servant, I am here to see your excellency." We all followed suit and saluted. During the salutation, I secretly glanced at Yuguerin. Lady Yugue is very beautiful, with a kind of beauty that makes people feel sorry for her. No wonder the emperor dotes on her. Lady Yu just entered the palace 2 months ago. I heard that she is very kind and nice to the palace ladies. Moreover, she was the sister of the late queen. The emperor had deep feelings for the late queen and loved her as much as anyone in her family. He often went in and out of Chushio Palace to let Concubine Yu serve him in his sleep. So it is no wonder that Sueyun wanted to go to Chushio Palace. After all, she wanted to become a noble lady, and it would be easy for her to get close to the noble lady Yu. Yugue lowered his head and said a few words to Sueyun. Sueyun nodded and then went forward to choose. I don't know if it was my illusion, but I always felt that the pleasant gentleman's eyes fell on me several times. But I didn't dare to be distracted. All my attention was focused on being careful and cautious about Sueyun, for fear that she might do something. Sueyun was seen walking among the palace maids and pointing at a few of them. "Just the few of you. Go back to Chushio Palace to report." The maids were very excited and kowtowed quickly. "Thank you for your grace." One of them was the palace maid behind me who had just spoken to Sueyun. After Sueyun found the palace maid, she walked up to Yu Guerin and stood beside her, seemingly not prepared to do anything to me. I frowned, not understanding what kind of medicine Sueyun Gord was selling. At this time, a gorgeous jade carriage walked in slowly. "Sister Yu, have you chosen your servant?" The jade sedan chair slowly descended, and a clear and beautiful voice came from inside. A eunuch lifted the curtain of the jade sedan chair, revealing the fairy-like face inside. 08. Eunuch Lu was startled and quickly stepped forward to pay his respects. "Your servant Lu Fu pays respects to the royal concubine. May the royal concubine be blessed with good health." The other palace maids and I shuddered and knelt down quickly. If Concubine Yu in the palace is the kind-hearted master, then Concubine Lan is the poisonous concubine that everyone fears. There is no queen in the harem now. Since the death of the previous queen, all the affairs of the harem have been handled by Concubine Lan. It was said that Concubine Lan was extremely jealous and that the palace maids and eunuchs who served her would be beaten to death if they did not please her in the slightest. The emperor once favored a palace maid who served under her, but before he could give her a position, the next day the little palace maid accidentally fell into the water and died. I also heard that the emperor once looked at a palace maid in the imperial concubine's palace for a few more seconds, and the maid accidentally fell that day, scratched her face, and was completely disfigured. Therefore, the servants in the palace did not want to serve in the imperial concubine's palace. I lowered my head, trying not to stand out in the crowd, hoping not to be chosen by the imperial concubine. But a huge force suddenly attacked me from behind, and I was pushed and fell in front of Concubine Lan's jade sedan chair. Everyone was startled by this sudden change and looked at me. My mind went blank, and I turned around to see the person who pushed me. It was the palace maid who was whispering to Tsuyun. I turned my head and glanced at Tsuyun behind Yugrin. She was looking at me with a smug look on her face, her eyes full of teasing and contempt. She just wants to kill me. Eunuch Lu was shocked and shouted at me, "How dare this lowly slave offend the imperial concubine? Someone, drag her away and beat her to death." The two young eunuchs took orders and walked towards me with great momentum. I lay down in front of the jade chair, looking up at the murderous concubine Lan. "The ground of the Ministry of Internal Affairs is uneven. Your precious body cannot be damaged. You can step on me to get off the jade chair." 09. As soon as I said this, Concubine Lan laughed and said, "He is a man who can talk." Eunuch Lu waved his hand to signal the two young eunuchs who had just approached to step back. Concubine Lan stood up, stepped directly on my back, and took off the jade shackle. My heart, which had risen to my throat, slowly relaxed. I felt I had escaped a disaster. "You will serve me at Shoyoga." Concubine Lan turned around and glanced at me. My heart was lifted up again. Serving Concubine Lan was like falling from one wolf's den into another. But what can I do? I can only kowtow and express my gratitude. Concubine Lan walked up to Concubine Yu, glanced at the maid she had chosen, and then jokingly said, "Sister Yu is so scheming. The servants she chose are all plain-looking. Are you afraid that these servants will climb into your bed?" Yu Guerin knelt down and said, "It is as your majesty taught me." Concubine Lan smiled smugly, pointed at the two beautiful palace maids behind her, and said to Concubine Yu, "I don't need these two servants anymore, so I'll give them to you." The two palace maids' faces changed drastically, and they knelt down quickly. Concubine Lan snorted coldly. "What? Don't want to? If you don't want to, I'll beat you to death." The two palace maids shrank at the same time, then shut their mouths and dared not speak. The noble lady replied calmly, "Thank you, madam." I lowered my head and said nothing. It was indeed very difficult for a servant in the palace to survive. Life and death depended on the thoughts of a noble. The most taboo thing in the harem is to be cautious with the servants sent from other palaces, because these servants are most likely to be spies. Therefore, these servants were either sent back to the Ministry of Internal Affairs with an excuse, or killed with a reason to avoid any problems. The Imperial Household Department would send the returned slaves directly to the Cold Palace or Zinzheka to do the hardest and most tiring work. Although this is the first time I met Concubine Lan and Concubine Yu today, I can tell from what Concubine Lan said that the relationship between the two is not good. Therefore, needless to say, the two palace maids sent by Concubine Lan must have had a miserable end, even though Concubine Yu was a kind-hearted person. And Concubine Lan's sending of two beautiful palace maids was obviously intended to cause trouble for Concubine Yu. Just because of a little quarrel, these two palace maids might lose their lives. I couldn't help feeling sad. Seeing that her goal had been achieved, Concubine Lan turned around and got on the jade sedan chair. Let's go back to the palace. The jade carriage moved slowly, and as a servant chosen by Concubine Lan Guifei, I naturally followed behind the jade carriage. I turned around and looked at Sueyun and Yugerin, who were still there. The former had a gloomy look on his face, while the latter seemed to nod and smile at me.
10.
When I arrived at Xiang Palace, the grandmother Huang, the housekeeper of the courtyard, arranged me to serve in the outer courtyard. I was only responsible for cleaning the fallen leaves and weeds in the courtyard every day, and also preparing water for Concubine Lan to wash her feet every day. But he didn't want me to serve him closely, and just asked me to escort him out of the hospital. Although Grandma Huang and other palace maids in Jiayang Palace would make things difficult for me, my life was much easier than in Zinzheku, and even my monthly salary increased by 1 yuan. After 3 months in Jiayang Palace, I know one thing. As long as I stay far away, when the emperor comes to Jiayang Palace for meals and overnight, I won't offend the imperial concubine. But if there was any mistake when the emperor came to Jiayang Palace, he would be beaten to death directly, without any surprise. I was careful and cautious and never made any mistakes on my business trips. Just when I thought my life was finally settling down, something unexpected happened. The cause of the incident was that Concubine Yu from Chushio Palace was pregnant with the emperor's heir. On the day the imperial physician confirmed the diagnosis, the emperor was overjoyed and named Concubine Yu that same day. He then stayed in Chushio Palace for 10 consecutive days and even forgot to come to Xiaoyang Palace on his regular monthly basis. Concubine Lan was so angry that she went to Chushio Palace in person to invite the emperor to have a meal, but she didn't expect that the emperor refused on the grounds that Concubine Yu needed to protect her pregnancy. After Concubine Lan came back, she was so angry that she smashed all the porcelain in the room. All the servants serving in Jiayang Palace were terrified and did everything with extreme caution. I thought the fight for favor among the concubines had nothing to do with me until Cuiyun came to Jiayang Palace to find me. Empress, you heard that you are best at making chestnut cakes. Now that I am pregnant and want to eat chestnut cakes, I want you to come over and make them. For a lowly person like you to be able to make cakes for Concubine Yu and the little prince in her belly, this is a blessing you have earned in 8 lifetimes. Sueyun looked down at me, her eyes full of contempt and disdain. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Sueyun spoke in a sharp voice.
What? Don't want to?
Empress Yu is pregnant with the heir to the throne. If you neglect her and something happens to the heir, you will have 10 heads chopped off. How could I not be willing? I just felt that this was a trap. I didn't understand why I was chosen. 11. I followed Sueyun on the way to Chushio Palace. I pinched my sleeve and found a packet of medicine powder that Grandma Huang had stuffed into my sleeve. It was given to me by Grandma Huang just when I left Xiaoyang Palace. She said at the time, "The queen said that Concubine Yu's belly made her very unhappy, so this matter is handed over to you. If this matter is successful, not only will your life be saved, but you will also be made a first-class maid in Xiaoyang Palace. Of course, if you dare to betray me, I will make you live a life worse than death. You are just a lowly palace maid. Being able to work for the queen is a blessing you have earned in 3 lifetimes." It was obvious that Concubine Lan wanted to take advantage of the opportunity when I made chestnut cake for Concubine Yu to make me drug her and kill the royal heir in her belly. Concubine Lan is not a fool. It was very strange that Concubine Yu asked me to make chestnut cake for her. It might even be a deliberate trap to trick her. But it was obvious that she didn't care. Let me give the drug, and if it succeeds, just push me out as a scapegoat. She got away with it cleanly. If she fails, she won't lose anything. After all, I'm just a slave. No one will make decisions for me, and no one will care if I die. I just don't understand what Yubin is thinking. She is not a fool. It is impossible for her not to know that Concubine Lan wants to harm her child. Is it really possible to use the child in her belly to frame Concubine Lan? Even if I succeed, I will be the only one to die. It is not easy to pull Concubine Lan out. Can't she see that? My mind was in a mess, and I just felt pitiful. I just wanted to live a good life and earn money to redeem my mother. Why was it so difficult?
12.
The process of making chestnut cake is not complicated, and the ingredients have been prepared long ago, so it is ready in less than half an hour. Suayan took me to the inner courtyard carrying the chestnut cake, and we entered the bedroom smoothly. As soon as I entered the bedroom, I saw Concubine Yu half leaning on the couch. I stepped forward and bowed. Your servant greets the Empress Yu. May the Empress be blessed with good health. Aunt Yu opened her eyes slightly and said, Stand up. I stood up obediently. Aunt Yu glanced at the chestnut cake in my hand, then chuckled and said, Suyin said your chestnut cake tastes better than others. I don't know what good things are in it. I want to taste it today. These words were said with a hint of meaning. My heart trembled unconsciously, and the hand holding the chestnut cake trembled uncontrollably. Suayin pushed me from behind and said, Hurry up and serve the chestnut cake. My expression moved, and my hand holding the chestnut cake slipped, and the whole plate of chestnut cake fell directly to the ground. The plate broke into pieces, and the chestnut cakes scattered all over the floor. Suayin's expression changed drastically. She squeezed my arm hard and shouted, How dare you? I endured the severe pain and knelt down in front of you. I didn't serve the chestnut cake properly. I know I was wrong. Please punish me, madam. Aunt Yu narrowed her eyes slightly, and a gloomy look flashed across her eyes, but it only passed away for a moment. She chuckled and said, It's okay, it's just chestnut cake, not a big deal. It looks like we won't be able to eat it today, you can go back. I felt relieved and breathed a sigh of relief. Did I escape a disaster? But how can I explain to Concubine Lan when I return? I returned to Xiang Palace anxiously, but before I could enter the yard, several guards chased me from behind and pinned me to the ground. I was a little confused, and the leading guard said angrily, You bold servant, you actually dared to poison the heir to the throne. Tell me, who instructed you?
My heart sank.
Sure enough, Aunt Yu had no intention of letting go of this opportunity. 13. I was brought back to Chushio Palace in a daze, and only came to my senses when I knelt in the inner courtyard of Chushio Palace again. There were already quite a few people sitting in front of me, and I lowered my head, not daring to look at them. Your Majesty. It was this slave who harmed the Empress. The Empress ate her chestnut cake and immediately had unbearable abdominal pain. The imperial physician also said that the Empress almost had a miscarriage because she took blood-activating medicine, and today the Empress ate the chestnut cake, so it was obviously poisoned by her. Suayin knelt beside me, pointed at me, and cried to the person in front of her. My heart trembled. Is the person in front of me the Emperor? But I didn't dare to look up. At this time, Concubine Lan Guifei's gentle voice rang out. Your Majesty, Qiu Chan is from my courtyard. If she makes a mistake, she deserves death. I will not be partial to her or commit corruption. Concubine Lan just made the final decision on this matter and let me take the blame. Yu Concubine's weak voice also rang out. Your Majesty, I want to know why Qiu Chan wants to harm me. I want her to tell me herself. If she really has any grievances, I will spare her life. Concubine Yu acted as gentle and kind as the rumors said before, but I could clearly hear the meaning behind her words. She wanted to use me to drag Concubine Lan into the water, even at the cost of saving my life. What kind of grievance can you have? Just beat him to death. Concubine Lan obviously understood what Concubine Yu meant, so she was ready to silence her, but she was interrupted by the emperor before she could finish her words. That's enough. The whole place was silent. The air seemed thinner, and people felt suffocated. Then I felt a frightening gaze falling on me. Look up. I slowly raised my head as I was told and looked at the bright yellow figure in front of me. He has sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, a straight nose, and a heroic air when his brows are slightly frowned, which makes people dare not look directly at him. He is the current Emperor Ling Zixiao. The moment our eyes met, I saw surprise and shock flash across the Emperor's originally icy eyes.
14.
That emotion passed by so quickly that no one else noticed it except me, who looked into his eyes. At this moment, I suddenly seemed to understand what my grandma said. If you have such eyes and eyebrows, good days are ahead. I ask you, did you poison the heir to the throne? Is there someone behind this? From the corner of my eye, I saw Concubine Lan holding the handkerchief tightly, and the corners of her eyes trembled unconsciously a few times. If you have any grievances, you can speak up. The emperor suddenly added another sentence. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone was shocked because everyone heard the hidden meaning of these words. The emperor is giving me a chance. He wants to save my life. The handkerchief in Concubine Lan's hand had been pinched out of shape, and she looked at me nervously. I knew this was my only chance, so I took a deep breath and took out a piece of chestnut cake from my waist pouch. Your Majesty, I did not poison you. This chestnut cake is proof. I made 7 chestnut cakes today. I thought the number was unlucky, so I secretly hid one. Your Majesty, please ask the imperial physician to come and test whether this chestnut cake is poisonous. Everyone present had different expressions. The emperor seemed to be thinking about something. Concubine Lan glanced at Concubine Yu, who was wiping her tears with a handkerchief, not showing any embarrassment of having her plan exposed. What can a chestnut cake prove? It's just an ordinary cake. Maybe you made it in advance just to confuse people. Suiyin spoke with a look of disdain. I bowed to the emperor once again and said, Your Majesty, everything used in the palace is recorded. Although chestnut cake is a common item, we in Xiang Palace have not received any ingredients for this cake in the past 2 months. The chestnut cake in my hand is fresh out of the oven. You can tell from its color. It is impossible for me to know that Concubine Yu suddenly wants to eat chestnut cake and prepare it in advance, so this chestnut cake can only be fresh out of the oven. 15. Suiyin was speechless. The emperor waved his hand, and the imperial physician who had been kneeling outside the palace came over. The doctor took the chestnut cake from my hand, then pulled out a silver needle and began to examine me. I took advantage of the gap and raised my head slightly to look at Aunt Yu. She still looked calm, as if she didn't care about the failure of her plan. On the other hand, Concubine Lan glared at me viciously, as if she was angry at me for not listening to her and poisoning the chestnut cake. Reporting to His Majesty, this chestnut cake does not contain any drugs that could harm the fetus. It is just an ordinary chestnut cake. The words of the imperial physician slowly echoed in my ears. My innocence was proven. At that moment, I had an urge to cry, but I bit my lips tightly to prevent myself from crying. The emperor said calmly, since it wasn't this palace maid who did it, let the Ministry of Internal Affairs continue to investigate. I must find out who dared to harm the heir to the throne. Everyone lowered their heads and dared not speak. Then the emperor looked at me and asked, What's your name? I lowered my head and replied carefully, I am Qiu Chan. The emperor hummed and said nothing. At this time, Concubine Yu suddenly spoke up. Your Majesty, I have wronged Qiu Chan, and I am really upset. I can't think of how to compensate Qiu Chan for the moment. How about Your Majesty give me some grace? The emperor's lips curled up slightly, obviously satisfied with what Princess Yu said. Concubine Lan looked unhappy. She didn't understand why things turned out like this. But she knew one thing, that the emperor was interested in me. She stared at me. Her eyes seemed to be filled with poison. I knelt on the ground, head down, and let them decide whether I lived or died. After a long while, the emperor spoke calmly. Qiu Chen, the maid of Xiang Palace, is smart and clever, just what I like. I have conferred her the title of beauty and granted her the residence in King Lianjiwen." After the emperor finished speaking, he stood up and left with a big laugh. I raised my head suddenly and met Concubine Yu's meaningful smile. At this moment, I suddenly understood that Concubine Yu had never intended to frame Concubine Lan from the beginning. She just pushed me to the side of the emperor and calculated the relationship between Concubine Lan and me.
16.
The imperial edict of canonization was delivered quickly, and I moved directly to King Lianjiwen. The Ministry of Internal Affairs also quickly sent several palace maids and eunuchs to serve me. The leader was Eunuch Lu, the chief steward of the imperial household department. When he saw me, he looked very unnatural.
"Good luck, my lady."
"Here are some brocades and jewelry that the Ministry of Internal Affairs prepared for you. I hope you like them." After Eunuch Lu finished speaking, the palace maid and eunuch behind him came up with a tray in their hands. I glanced at them and saw that these things far exceeded the share of a beauty. I knew in my heart that this was Eunuch Lu apologizing to me. When I bumped into Concubine Lan, Eunuch Lu ordered me to be beaten to death. Although he didn't do it, he was still worried about offending me. I looked at the somewhat terrified Eunuch Lu and said calmly, "Thanks to Eunuch Lao, I really like these things." Hearing what I said, Eunuch Lu's brows relaxed, and it was obvious that he understood that the incident from that day had been exposed. "Then I will take my leave." Eunuch Lu bowed and happily led his people away, while I stared in a daze at the gifts filling the yard. What should I do now? In the afternoon, Eunuch Lu asked someone to bring me a message that the person who drugged Concubine Yu had been found out, and it was Suiyun. Suiyun was beaten to death, and her great-aunt who worked in the imperial household department was also punished. I was not surprised at all when I heard the news. There has to be someone to blame for this matter. Suiyun followed Concubine Yu's words and kept accusing me of poisoning. It would be most reasonable to put the blame on her in the end. In addition, she and I had a grudge in Zinseku, so she also had the motive to frame me. Thinking of this, Yu Bin's smiling face flashed through my mind again. She was so scheming, as if she had been planning this day since she transferred Chui Yun to her courtyard to serve her. So Yubi has known about my existence for a long time, and she definitely knows the person with the similar features to me. Thinking of this, I couldn't wait to go back to Zinseku to find Grandma Sun. Grandma Sun was not surprised to see me. Without waiting for me to ask, she slowly said, "Your features are a bit like the late queen's." I understood a lot at once. Everyone in the harem knew that the emperor had deep affection for the late queen. The late queen had passed away for 3 years, and the throne had been vacant for 3 years. Concubine Lan entered the palace after the late queen passed away. She had never seen the late queen, so naturally she didn't know that I looked like her. Since Concubine Yu was the former queen's sister, it was obvious at first glance. Grandma Sun looked at my stunned face and said, "If you want to survive in this palace, you have to stand in a high position and be favored. It doesn't matter what means you use. The most important thing is to stay alive." I came to my senses, bowed to Grandma Sun, and had a lot of thoughts in my mind. When I returned to King Lianjiwen, I saw the eunuch from the Jingshai Fang waiting in the courtyard. "Congratulations, my beauty. The emperor will let you sleep with him tonight." 17. Just as it got dark, the servant's sedan chair arrived at Qingliang courtyard. I was carried onto the sedan chair without anyone asking me whether I was willing or not. In their eyes, this was my blessing. After teaching me the rules of serving the emperor, the grandmothers sent me to the bedroom. The emperor came at midnight. I helped him undress, and he stared at me intently. There is no care, no mercy, just a brutal desire. When the passion reached its climax, the emperor hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Iris, Iris." I know this is the late queen's nickname. At this moment, I responded in a mysterious way, "I'm here." In just a moment, I noticed that the emperor trembled all over, and then I felt the rough movements below suddenly became gentle. The emperor looked at me with a dazed look in his eyes, and his voice trembled a little. "You are finally back." I didn't say anything. I just hugged the emperor tightly. A cloud of love that was lingering and long-lasting. Not long after I was sent back to King Lianjiwen the next day, a sealed imperial edict was delivered to me. The emperor conferred upon me the title of noble lady and bestowed upon me the title Ro. From a beauty to a noble lady, it only took one day, and the entire harem was shocked. The first person who couldn't sit still was Concubine Lan. Not long after the imperial edict arrived, Concubine Lan sent someone over. It was Grandma Huang who brought people here. Grandma Huang was Concubine Lan's dowry grandmother and also the person Concubine Lan trusted the most. It was Grandma Huang who stuffed the medicine powder into my mouth and asked me to poison Concubine Yu that day. Grandma Huang came to my yard with a few palace maids in a proud manner. Seeing me, she did not bow, but said in a haughty manner, "Our noble concubine has a reward, and you, noble lady, why don't you kneel down to receive it?" I stepped forward to pay my respects. Grandma Huang looked at me coldly, picked up something from the tray held by the palace maid who was following behind her, and threw it hard at my feet. I looked closely and saw that it was a foot basin. Our noble concubine said that Lady Ro is the best at washing feet. This dining tool cannot be thrown away. There will be opportunities in the future to wash the emperor's feet to curry favor with him. It was obvious that this was meant to humiliate me, but I didn't get angry. I just said, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for the gift." Grandma Huang was a little unwilling and scolded me. "Even if you are a servant, you are still a waste." I silently picked up the foot basin, handed it to the maid, and told her to put it away. Grandma Huang became furious when she saw this. She took 2 steps forward and slapped me in the face. I didn't dodge and took the slap head on. "You traitorous slave! Do you think that you can challenge the imperial concubine just because you have become a noble? I tell you, as long as our queen is in this harem, you will have no good days. There are many dry wells in this palace. You might fall into one of them one day, and there won't be a trace of your body left." Listening to Grandma Huang's scolding, I just found it ridiculous that Concubine Lan still hasn't figured out Concubine Yu's plan. Maybe she also saw it, but in her eyes, she was high and mighty, and it was my honor for her to let me take the blame and die. If I dared to have any different thoughts, I would be a traitorous servant. 18. Grandma Huang scolded for a long time, and many palace maids and eunuchs were standing at the door looking in to see the excitement. After Grandma Huang left, a young palace maid came up to me with a bottle of ointment and looked at my slightly swollen face with a worried look on her face. "My lord, this jade face ointment was sent by the Ministry of Internal Affairs a while ago. Just apply it on your face, and it will reduce swelling and dissolve blood stasis in less than half an hour." I took the jade cream and waved my hand to signal her to leave. My cheeks in the mirror were red and swollen, and my eyebrows and eyes became unfamiliar because of the redness. I put away the jade face cream. Since the emperor likes my eyes and eyebrows, I wonder who is more important in his mind, these eyes and eyebrows or Concubine Lan. The emperor came to King Lianjuan during lunchtime. I could hear his anxious footsteps in the yard. The announcement had just sounded, and before I had time to kneel and salute, the emperor had already stepped in. "Your Majesty, I pay my respects to you. May your Majesty be blessed with good health and happiness." Before I could kneel down, the emperor grabbed my hand and said, "My beloved concubine, please don't be polite. How is living in King Lianjuan? Do you want to?" I slowly raised my head. The emperor froze in his tracks. His face, which had been slightly happy, suddenly turned gloomy. "Who hit you?" I didn't say anything, but tears kept falling. "I'm not a good person. I just want to survive." The anger in the emperor's eyes could no longer be suppressed. He glanced coldly at the palace maids and eunuchs behind me, and a chill emanated from his whole body. "Tell me, who beat the noble lady?" The palace maids and eunuchs knelt on the ground, all trembling with fear. One of the eunuchs bravely said, "Today, the royal concubine asked Grandma Huang to send some gifts over." Having said this, the young eunuch immediately lowered his head and dared not say any more. The emperor snorted coldly and left. Half an hour later, news came that Grandma Huang was beaten to death for her misconduct, and the imperial concubine was also fined half a year's salary for her poor teaching. After that, Boxes of rare medicinal herbs and expensive tonics were sent to my Qingliang hospital. The chief and deputy chief doctors of the Imperial Medical Hospital came to treat my injuries every day. Everyone in the palace knows that the noble lady from Qinglianjuan is the apple of the emperor's eye. Moreover, this noble lady and Concubine Lan are irreconcilable. 19. I thought that the first concubine to come to my Qinglianjuan after this incident would be the furious Concubine Lan, but unexpectedly, the first one to come was Concubine Yu. With her belly not yet visible, she entered my yard gracefully, supported by 2 palace maids. She only spoke after I bowed. Sister, how does it feel to be the emperor's favorite concubine? I remained calm and said, thank you to Empress Yubi for bringing me here. Aunt Yu chuckled and didn't say anything. She just took the tea and sipped it slowly. She didn't even bother to give me a look, obviously looking down on me. After that, she said nothing, drank a cup of tea for an hour, and then got up and left. Although I felt strange, I still stood up to see him off. At the entrance of Qinglianjuan, Aunt Yu suddenly took my hand and said eagerly, Sister, we had a good chat today. Let's visit each other more often in the future. I frowned slightly and looked around. I saw some palace maids and eunuchs secretly observing outside Qingliang courtyard. I immediately understood what was going on. Yubi is such a good plan. She didn't say anything, but she made people think we have a harmonious relationship. Others didn't know what she talked to me about, but they saw that we talked for an hour. Even if I told Concubine Lan the truth, I'm afraid she wouldn't believe it. She might even think that Concubine Yu and I were the ones who did the poisoning and the beating of Grandma Huang. Now, with new grudges and old hatreds, I'm afraid Concubine Lan only wants to kill me. Your Highness, what a clever trick. I looked at you and Yunyang chuckled. I don't understand. Your Majesty, aren't you afraid that I will seek cooperation from Concubine Lan? Aunt Yu smiled even more. She let go of my hand, her eyes full of pride. From poisoning to Aunt Huang, she won't believe you. After that, she left laughing. In less than half an hour, the news that Concubine Yu and I had become friends spread throughout the harem. Many of these were instigated by Yu and I. 20. After Aunt Yu left, I went to Xiaoyang Palace. This is the first time I have taken the initiative to look for Concubine Lan since the poisoning incident in Chuxiu Palace. As soon as I stepped into Concubine Lan's bedroom, a blue and white porcelain cup slammed heavily at my feet. Porcelain pieces exploded and flew everywhere, cutting my ankle. I said nothing and bowed to the dark-faced Concubine Lan sitting on the high seat. Your concubine, pay my respects to the concubine. May you be blessed with good health. Concubine Lan snorted coldly. You little bitch, you dare to come to my Xiaoyang Palace? Do you really think I can't do anything to you? I raised my head and looked at Concubine Lan Guifei. I know that the queen is angry now, but Concubine Yu has been trying to sow discord between the queen and me. I am worried that the queen is being plotted against by Concubine Yu. Concubine Lan stood up, walked a few steps quickly to me, and kicked me in the heart. The kick was so hard that a fishy sweet taste came up in my throat. You bitch, you come here to provoke me. I asked you to drug me, but you refused. Instead, you tried to sow discord between me and the emperor, causing the emperor to beat Grandma Huang to death. Today, you even conspired with that bitch, Concubine Yu, for an hour. You said Concubine Yu was trying to sow discord between you and me? Is there any need to provoke? You and I are irreconcilable. I touched the blood at the corner of my mouth, took a deep breath, and suppressed the pain in my heart. Your Highness, your mind is now full of hatred for Concubine Yu. This is Concubine Yu's purpose. You have forgotten to deal with Concubine Yu, and even more so, Concubine Yu is pregnant with the royal heir. She is the biggest threat to you. Concubine Yu is just a palace maid, without a family background. To you, your Highness, I am just an ant. Even if the emperor favors me, I will never be better than you. My words made Concubine Lan raise her eyebrows. I knew she had calmed down a little, so I continued to speak fiercely. Whether you believe it or not, I didn't give the chestnut cake to Concubine Yu that day, but Concubine Yu is still poisoned. It was obviously a fake poisoning. Concubine Yu is not a fool. She is pregnant with the royal heir. How dare she ask people around you to make cakes for her when the royal heir is so important? She sent me to the emperor because I resemble the late empress. She knew that the emperor would be attracted to me. She also knew that once I ascended to the throne, you would definitely attack me. We would both lose, and she could conserve her energy to give birth to a prince. Concubine Lan narrowed her eyes at me. I didn't know how much she had heard, so I decided to add fuel to the fire. Your Majesty, tomorrow I will ask the emperor to let me move to the side hall of Xiang Palace. Concubine Lan's expression changed slightly, and she looked at me with some suspicion. 21. Concubine Lan is the mistress of Xiaoyang Palace. If I move to Xiaoyang Palace, it means telling everyone that I am Concubine Lan's person. As the mistress of a palace, Concubine Lan can also exercise the power to punish me. As long as it is not excessive, the emperor will not say anything even if he knows. The most important thing is that the emperor dotes on me now and comes to my courtyard more often. If I move to Xiaoyang Palace, the emperor will visit Concubine Lan more often for the sake of face, and they will develop a close relationship when they meet. This will have many benefits. Concubine Lan frowned and looked at me. What are you going to do? I bowed deeply and said, I only ask that you can save my life. Although you may have a bad temper, Concubine Yu is the one who kills without shedding blood. Compared with Concubine Yu, I want to be yours more. Concubine Lan stared at me intently, as if trying to tell whether my words were true or false. After a long while, she spoke. Okay, I'll give you a chance. If I find out that you have any ulterior motives, I will definitely kill you. Hearing this, I breathed a sigh of relief. The first step of my counterattack was successful. 22. When I was serving the emperor in his bedroom at night, I mentioned the idea of moving to Xiaoyang Palace to him. The emperor didn't care about such a small matter at all and nodded in agreement. When the news of the palace move spread the next day, there was another round of discussion in the harem. Because in their eyes, I have already surrendered to Concubine Lan and am officially on the same boat with her. Yubei's provocation seemed extremely ridiculous. When the Ministry of Internal Affairs was helping me move things, Concubine Yu came over, and she looked very unhappy. I underestimated you. I bowed and said, Your Majesty, you are joking. I am just an insignificant and pitiful insect. And you left angrily. After moving to Xiaoyang Palace, whenever the emperor came to my place, he would always go to Concubine Lan's place. The relationship between the two also eased a lot. Several times I used the excuse that I had my period and it was not appropriate for me to serve the emperor in bed, so I asked him to go and rest with Concubine Lan. Concubine Lan was very pleased with this and even gave me a golden hairpin as a reward. Concubine Yu hasn't made any moves recently, but I'm not worried because there are people who are more worried than me. After all, if Concubine Yu gives birth safely, it will not only affect the harem, but also the former dynasty. So Concubine Lan will definitely take action. When Concubine Yu was in her 5th month of pregnancy, Concubine Lan finally took action. Concubine Lan Guifei is different from Concubine Yu in that she is more straightforward and direct. She either used money to seduce or threatened her relatives to make the palace maids and eunuchs take action directly. Spread oil and wax on the door of Concubine Yu's palace, loosen the stones on the path in Concubine Yu's palace, or bury a lot of musk in Concubine Yu's palace. The effect was very obvious. Yubi almost had miscarriage several times. Afterwards, the emperor was also angry and ordered a thorough investigation. Fortunately, Concubine Lan's means of intimidation were more severe. Even though the Ministry of Punishment used torture, those people did not reveal the truth. After all, their families were in Concubine Lan's hands. Seeing that Concubine Yu's belly was getting bigger day by day, Concubine Lan finally took ruthless action. She bribed a young eunuch and directly attacked Concubine Yu. However, it seemed that Yubi had been prepared. The eunuch failed and she was going to catch him, but he bit his tongue and committed suicide, so there was no evidence to prove the incident. This was the closest time to success, But the failure made Concubine Lan so angry that she smashed all the vases in the room. The entire Xiang palace was in a state of trepidation, and even I stayed indoors until a young eunuch quietly entered my bedroom at night. 23. The eunuch bowed to me first, then looked around and saw that there was no one else. He spoke carefully. Our queen asked me to thank you. Thank you for your reminder. Otherwise the queen and the little prince would be in great danger today. I smiled and said nothing. The young eunuch spoke again. The queen also said that she would come to thank you when the little prince is born smoothly. I waved my hands and said, don't be polite. I just made a deal with your queen. I helped her this time, and she will protect my life in the future. The eunuch nodded and said, I will pass on these words to you. The eunuch bowed and prepared to leave, but I stopped him. Ask your queen if she wants to get rid of Concubine Lan. The young eunuch was stunned for a moment, as if he thought he had heard it wrong. It took him a while to come to his senses, then he bowed to me and quietly retreated. The next day, when I was admiring the flowers in the imperial garden, Aunt Yu appeared quietly. She didn't say any polite words and went straight to the point. How can you deal with Concubine Lan? I smiled and said nothing, just staring at her bulging belly. Yu's face changed and she quickly protected her belly. No, this is absolutely not possible. Concubine Lan's father is Marquis Yongyang, and her mother's family is of great rank. For ordinary crimes, the emperor will not punish her too severely for the sake of Marquis Yongyang. Only crimes that harm the heir to the throne can really make the emperor angry. Concubine Lan is not stupid. Although her moves are simple and rough, she finishes well. It is hard to find any flaws. You escaped the charge of the eunuch yesterday. What about tomorrow? What about the day after tomorrow? In addition to the eunuch, there will be the middle-aged woman and the imperial physician. By then, it will not only be the baby in your belly that will die, but you too may die. My words made Yubi's face instantly turn ugly, because she knew that what I said was true. Both she and I, although we are good at calculating, feel helpless when faced with someone as simple and rude as Concubine Lan. Aunt Yu didn't continue talking, and I didn't interrupt her. I got up and left the imperial garden.
24.
After returning from the imperial garden, I waited patiently. I can't tell how much love Yu and I really has for the baby in her belly. In order to push me in front of the emperor, Concubine Yu actually took some medicine that could harm the fetus. Otherwise, the imperial physician would have revealed her true intentions after taking her pulse. This incident is enough to show that Yu Bai is a person who will do anything to achieve her goals, even if it means using her unborn child as a bargaining chip. So I knew that Concubine Yu would definitely take action, especially since Concubine Lan used the little eunuch to attack her last time, putting her in danger. Sure enough, half a month later, Concubine Yu had a miscarriage. It was Concubine Lan who pushed her. The reason was that the emperor rested in Concubine Lan's room, but in the middle of the night, Concubine Yu got pregnant and asked the emperor to leave. Concubine Lan had a bad temper to begin with, and she stopped Concubine Yu early in the morning, ready to scold her. It was originally just a verbal conflict, but Concubine Yu turned out to be out of character and made sarcastic remarks about Concubine Lan, especially mocking her for not being able to have children. This really hit Concubine Lan's sore spot, and she became so angry that she lost her mind and pushed Concubine Yu. Just because of this, Yubi fell down and had a miscarriage. In order to appease Concubine Yu, the emperor appointed her as Concubine Yu, while Concubine Lan was banished to the cold palace because of her murder of the royal heir, with solid evidence from witnesses and objects. Initially, the emperor only intended to deprive Concubine Lan of her title and had no intention of sending her to the cold palace. Instead, Concubine Yu knelt before the emperor, holding the already formed male fetus, and begged him to make the decision. Only then did the emperor banish Concubine Lan to the cold palace. When I heard that Yui was pregnant, my heart ached for a long time. I was partly responsible for his death. Although I felt sad, I did not regret it. Grandma Sun was right. In this palace, it doesn't matter what your means are. The most important thing is to stay alive.
25.
It goes without saying that the fate of Concubine Lan, who was banished to the cold palace, was obvious. Now that Concubine Yu is in charge of the harem, it goes without saying what the fate of Concubine Lan, who is banished to the cold palace, would be. Because I stay indoors and deliberately avoid Concubine Yu is the only one in power in the palace now. Concubine Yu also enjoyed this kind of day, and the palace became peaceful. I always remember my identity, which is the emperor's substitute. I know a lot about the late queen from Grandma Sunday. She liked chrysanthemum tea, bamboo, lake blue, and osmanthus cake. I imitated everything about the late queen, and the emperor liked me more and more. I was promoted by the emperor and given the title of Rupin. Concubine Yu never attacked me, but I knew that she would not let me go. After all, she would not allow anyone who could threaten her existence to be in the harem, so she was waiting for an opportunity. I don't know when the opportunity will come, so I can only be careful everywhere. Soon I became pregnant with the royal heir. When Concubine Yu heard the news, she personally brought the imperial physician to examine my pulse. She smiled happily, as if she was pregnant. She promised the emperor, "Your Majesty, rest assured, I will take good care of Sister Ro and let her give birth to a little prince for you." I frowned slightly, not understanding Yubei's purpose. She dared to say these words in front of the emperor. It is no different from a military warrant. If anything happens to the baby in my belly, it will be her responsibility. Why should she trouble herself? 26. During my pregnancy, I was very careful and cautious, fearing that Yubi might do something. In the end, Aunt Yu did nothing and even gave me a lot of supplements. These supplements were delivered in the presence of the emperor and the imperial physician, who also checked them and found nothing amiss. She also carefully instructed the Ministry of Internal Affairs to prepare a midwife and a wet nurse for me. She was really thoughtful in every aspect, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. The emperor was very pleased with her diligence and praised her, and he visited her Chushio palace more often. When I was in the 8th month of pregnancy, and you still hadn't done anything, and I couldn't help but start to think more about it. Now, even if Concubine Yu follows Concubine Lan's example and asks someone to bump into me, an 8-month-old baby can be delivered, and it won't harm the baby in my belly at all. So she really didn't think of harming the baby in my belly. But if I give birth to a little prince, it will be a huge threat to her. So the person she really wants to harm is me. As long as I die, even if I give birth to a little prince, she can still raise him. I put myself into Concubine Yu's perspective and thought about it carefully. Suddenly, I seemed to understand why Concubine Yu didn't do anything to my child. Because she was afraid, I was the one who reminded her to use the child to deal with Concubine Lan. So she was worried that if I didn't kill me the first time, I would use the same method to frame her.
She didn't dare take the risk.
So she decided to let me have the baby. But she wanted to keep her position, so she had no choice but to kill me. If I were Concubine Yu, I would want to kill myself, but I wouldn't want anyone to find out. The best time is when I give birth. Childbirth is the most dangerous for women. If I died during childbirth, no one would consider it a surprise. Aunt Yu is the most cautious person, and killing me this way without anyone noticing is also the best way for her. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Concubine, you must have more tricks than just these. There must be others. I just didn't see it at the moment. But these are not important. What is important is that I have to prepare well and keep myself alive. 27. The emperor came first on the day I gave birth. He and Concubine Yu were guarding outside the house. The room was bustling with activity. The imperial physician was giving me acupuncture, and the midwife was helping me adjust the fetal position. I squinted my eyes slightly. The fetus had just moved, and the pain was not severe. I was also very clear-headed. The doctor in front of me was not the same doctor who had been taking care of my pregnancy. Although my mother-in-law kept the baby in the natural position, her hands were obviously shaking as she rubbed my belly. It was obvious that she was nervous. The midwives in the palace are all experienced, and it is impossible for them to be so nervous, so she must be guilty. Thinking of this, I cried out to the outside of the door, Your Majesty, I am in so much pain." I am in so much pain. I want to see you. My voice went out, and in an instant the emperor's voice rang out from the door. Chonner, don't be afraid. I'm outside. I'll be watching over you. I felt relieved when I was sure that the emperor was just outside the door. At this time, the imperial physician spoke to the busy palace maids. There should be no idle people waiting in the delivery room. You all stay outside the door. The midwife will call you when needed. The palace maids took the order and left. I know that the imperial physician is about to take action. My queen, this is medicine to help you have a smooth delivery. Take a sip first. After the palace maids left, the imperial physician came over to me with a bowl of medicine. The smell of the medicine was very pungent. I frowned slightly and looked up at the imperial physician. The imperial physician was a little afraid to look me in the eye. I knew there was something wrong with the medicine. After confirming this, I felt relieved. Now, it's my turn to make a move. I pulled out a dagger from under the pillow. The imperial physician and the old lady were stunned when they saw this. I gave them a cold smile and then shouted sadly at the door, "Your Majesty, help. Someone wants to kill me and the little prince." The miserable screams made the faces of the imperial physician and the middle-aged woman change color. I saw through their thoughts, and they instinctively came over to cover my mouth. I raised the dagger and stabbed myself in the stomach. 28. The emperor kicked the door open fiercely, and the scene inside scared everyone. I was lying in a pool of blood with a dagger stuck in my stomach, and the imperial physician and the midwife were covering my mouth. The emperor was furious. "Protect the driver." The imperial physician and the old lady were so frightened that they immediately let go of the patient. "It's unfair, Your Majesty." The emperor stepped forward and kicked both of them. The two men were kicked to the ground and kowtowed for mercy with pale faces. "Your Majesty, please spare our lives. We did nothing. It was the queen who stabbed herself. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Please spare my life." The guards rushed in, and the whole delivery room was in chaos. The emperor hugged me and said, "My dear, how are you?" I held back the severe pain and glanced at Concubine Lan at the door. Her face had already turned pale. I knew it was my turn to perform. I looked at the emperor, and tears slowly fell. "Your Majesty, I have to leave you again. I can't bear to leave you." I used the word again, very cleverly, and the emperor's eyes turned red in an instant. He shook his head and said, "Don't talk nonsense. I won't let you leave. I can't live without you." As he said this, the emperor shouted to the outside of the door, "Call the imperial physician! Call the imperial physician!" I reached out my hand and slowly stroked the emperor's face, revealing a sad smile. "It is not a pity for me to die. I just hope that the child in my belly can be safe. After I am gone, this child can help me take care of the emperor, and I will be satisfied. Perhaps my existence has brought misfortune to many people. I only hope that after my death, Your Majesty will let those people go." After saying this, I slowly closed my eyes. I had already had enough scenes, and it would be bad if I said more. The emperor's roar filled my ears. There was also the sound of the imperial physician rolling and crawling. 29. The imperial physician and the old lady were imprisoned separately, and the bowl of medicine was used as evidence. The emperor ordered a thorough investigation and stressed that if the imperial household department could not find anything, the entire department would have no need to exist. This birth was very difficult. Although I deliberately held back my strength and the dagger wound was not serious, I still bled heavily, which caused me to lose my strength and faint several times during delivery. It took me 2 hours to give birth to a little prince, and I was so exhausted that I passed out. It was 2 days later when I thought about it again. The emperor was still guarding my bed, his eyes full of fatigue. He breathed a sigh of relief when he saw me wake up. "Chonner, you gave me a healthy little prince. I thank you. I will give you justice and endless honor." Under severe torture by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, both the imperial physician and the old woman confessed. They were all instructed by Concubine Lan to let me die in this childbirth. But they all said that I stabbed myself, but the Ministry of Internal Affairs did not believe it. It was discovered that the bowl of medicine the imperial physician gave me contained blood-activating herbs in order to prevent the mother from dying from hemorrhage after childbirth. The emperor tortured all the palace maids and eunuchs in Chushio Palace. Also got a lot of news. It seemed that Concubine Yu framed Concubine Lan, and that Concubine Yu's miscarriage was fake, and the fetus in her belly was actually stillborn and could not be born into full term. The emperor was furious and banished Concubine Yu to the cold palace. All those involved were beaten to death. In order to compensate me, the emperor named me Concubine Ro, in charge of the affairs of the 6 palaces, and the little prince was also named Crown Prince. 3 months later, I recovered completely, and the first thing I did was to go to the cold palace to meet Concubine Yu. Concubine Yu sat blankly under the eaves of the cold palace. When she saw me coming, she seemed to have regained some consciousness. "You bitch, you are really good at tricks and have a cruel heart. You can even be cruel to yourself. You little bitch, it's all my fault that I made a mistake in the first place, which is why you, a little bitch, won. If I were given a chance, I would crush you under my feet." I shook my head slightly. "Empress Yu, it didn't just miss a move. Your mistake was sending me to the emperor's bed. Your mistake is that you don't treat me as a human being, you scheme against me at will, and you want me to die at will. I originally just wanted to have a steamed bun and a plate of pickles for every meal. It was you who pushed me into this position, so everything is because of you. You deserve it. So, you don't stand a chance either." Having said this, I waved at the door. 2 young eunuchs came in holding a tray with white silk and a porcelain vase on it. "Pick one." I looked at Concubine Yu and spoke. Concubine Yu looked at the things on the tray in horror and stepped back unconsciously. "How dare you kill me? I am Concubine Yu, the emperor's concubine. How dare you kill me? You are such a daring slave." I looked at him calmly and said, "When you forced Concubine Lan to death in the cold palace, why didn't you think you were too bold?" Concubine Yu roared. "How can it be the same? I am the master. I can do whatever I want, and you are just a slave in the Zinseku. How dare you kill me?" I said nothing and turned and walked out. "Stop right there."
Concubine Yu roared.
I stopped. "I'm telling you, your father is in my hands, and your brother who fled is also in my hands. If I die, they won't survive either." When I heard Concubine Yu say this, the corners of my mouth curled up. It turned out that this was the backup plan Concubine Yu had prepared. I turned to look at Concubine Yu and smiled brilliantly. "If they are really dead, I have to thank you." Concubine Yu was stunned, obviously not expecting me to say that. I ignored her and continued walking out. Concubine Yu was obviously anxious. She took a few quick steps to stop me and said, "Do you think you won? In fact, you are just a substitute for my sister. You always live in someone else's shadow. The emperor doesn't love you at all. You are just a tragedy." Looking at the hysterical Concubine Yu, I just felt that she had lived too well in the past. Why did she feel that I needed a man's love? Why did she feel that it was not good to live in someone else's shadow? For people like us, it is difficult to survive. I chuckled.
"I don't care."
After saying that, I turned around and left. Concubine Yu was obviously still unwilling to give up. She was about to stop me, but the 2 young eunuchs grabbed her first. "Why don't you care? Why don't you care?" She yelled at me. I pretended not to hear anything and walked all the way to the door before stopping. Then I said calmly, "Send Concubine Yu on her way." The eunuch behind him bowed and said, "I obey your command." Behind me, I heard Concubine Yu screaming in fear. I stepped out of the cold palace, raised my head to look at the square sky, took a deep breath, and the days ahead were finally going to be much better. End of full text.